Just a heads up, this review will spoil all of WandaVision and many MCU movies. We good? Cool. So WandaVision recently wrapped up, and most people seem to really like it. And it's easy to see why. There's a lot to like about this weird little MCU show. So in this full series review, let's check out why it's pretty good, and why some people have every right to be a little less impressed.
I want to have an opinion about those boring-ass Marvel movies. And I want those opinions to be of any concern to the people making them.
The biggest strength of WandaVision is that it's largely a character-driven story. Broadly speaking, you can split most movies and TV shows into two categories based on where they focus: plot-driven stories and character-driven stories. That's way oversimplifying it, but hopefully you get the point as I explain. As you'd expect, a plot-driven story is where the focus is on the plot developments, aka everything that's happening around the characters that push them to act. Movies like Age of Ultron and shows like Westworld fall into this group, just to name a few. And on the other side are the character-driven stories, the ones where the plot takes a backseat in favor of the characters themselves. The original Iron Man, movies like Joker, and sitcoms like Parks and Recreation are great examples of this.
Leslie, I typed your symptoms into the thing up here and it says you could have network connectivity problems.
Character-driven stories don't really need a strong plot, because if the characters are interesting or likable enough, then that's all we need to keep us engaged. Of course, neither is better than the other, and a lot of the best movies and shows balance plot and characters really well. The ones that don't are a little more divisive.
My part. I'm the protagonist of this operation.
But since WandaVision is a show instead of a movie, it's able to spend more time on two of the more interesting and underused characters in the MCU, Wanda and Vision.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
Since her first appearance, Wanda has always been one of the more unique MCU characters. Her powers are weird and pretty cool, and her backstory of being a human experiment has neat story potential. But she mostly goes through stuff like coping with the loss of her brother off screen. And between an accident, her romance, and watching her loved one die not once, but twice, it kind of makes you wonder why it took her so long to get a little more screen time. The MCU just keeps kicking her down more. And Vision is in the same boat. A lot of what I said about Wanda applies to him as well. He basically goes through an entire arc of a machine becoming more human off screen. So, fast forward to WandaVision, and it's nice to see these two finally get something to call their own. After all, some Avengers are still waiting.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
The show does a lot to make our leads feel like actual people, with their own quirks and relationship dynamics. We got glimpses of this earlier in some of the other MCU movies.
In my defense, I haven't actually ever eaten anything before, so please.
But it's nice to actually see them be a normal couple for a change. Every time the spotlight is focused on these two, you can see why the show gets a lot of love. Their interactions are really cute, and the more mundane situations are great for giving them the extra characterization they've been missing for some time. This praise doesn't apply to just the characters either. Both Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany get a chance to flex their acting muscles. Who'd have thought the guy playing the sentient robot is also pretty funny and pretty charming? Instead of, well, robotic. And of course, Elizabeth Olsen knocks it out of the park. She constantly does an amazing job whenever she's playing up the silly sitcom stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's about.
Or when she has to showcase the weight of her pain and grief, especially later. While it's fun to see these actors and characters get a chance to really shine, the supporting cast puts in a lot of work too. Of course, the best new addition has to be everyone's favorite magical girl, Agatha Harkness. I'm glad people are finally coming around to seeing how great Catherine O'Hara is. She was great in Parks and Rec.
Steven, be careful!
Pancho!
She was great in Spider-Verse.
Your friends call you Doc Ock?
Friends actually call me Liz.
And to no surprise, she kills it in WandaVision as well. You can tell she's having a lot of fun with the role, even before she spills the beans later on.
Don't mind me. I'm just looking for your dark liquor.
What?
Not for me. For the twins. What kind of babysitter do you think I am? A
lot of people, myself included, are glad she's sticking around for the future. And the other great supporting cast member is Randall Park returning as Jimmy Woo. He's been great as a lovable dork in everything from Fresh Off the Boat to Ant-Man 2.
Again. Take it easy. Okay. Did you want to grab dinner or something? I mean, because I'm free. Yeah, come on.
And while he doesn't get all that much screen time, he's still fun regardless. But that's about where the praise for the characters ends. Because everyone else ranges from okay to downright awful. Pietro Peter is about as interesting as he was in Age of Ultron. Maybe less, if we're being honest. The reveal of the other Quicksilver is neat, but not really much comes of it. He gets like what, less than 10 minutes of time with his family? I know MCU Quicksilver probably isn't high on most people's favorites, but he deserved more than this as his first appearance. He could have been a fun addition, but he just isn't around enough. And the reveal of him just being some rando is really, really lame. It makes his reveal less of a neat multiverse tie-in and more of a cheap gimmick to just keep us watching next week. He's easily the most underused character and idea in the show. Kat Dennings is back, and she's mostly the same character as she was in Thor. If you like her there, you'll like her here too. But if you didn't, WandaVision isn't going to change your mind. Her later moments with Vision are really good though. But from there, we get a new character, Monica Rambeau, and she's just kind of there. We don't really know that much about her as a person besides her mom being Captain Marvel's best friend and her old job at S.W.O.R.D. And in WandaVision, she's mostly a mouthpiece for whatever the current plot developments are, like getting into the breach or mentioning her science friend. But in her defense, she's by no means the first Marvel character to have a lackluster introduction. Doctor Strange and Black Widow were pretty boring at first, but grew on people with time. I could see Monica improving as a character somewhere down the road. The last new addition is everyone's favorite character, S.W.O.R.D. director Hayward. He's the worst character in the show, to nobody's surprise. He's just so bland and one note, kind of like all the other lame Marvel villains like Jeff Bridges. He really didn't need to exist either. If you cut him out of the story, what do you lose? Privileged Vision?
Hey, excuse me, what IPA do you have on tap?
And really, the entire S.W.O.R.D. plotline is unnecessary, especially since Agatha and Wanda herself are way better antagonists for this kind of story. But moving on from that, having a mostly solid cast is one of the reasons the show is good. If there were too many characters like Monica or Hayward, there's no way the show would have worked even if the plot was still solid. Speaking of plot, it does a good job of keeping us engaged through its duration. The main plot is split between what's going on in Wanda's world and the outside world, at least for the earlier episodes. A common complaint I noticed during the earlier episodes was the slow pacing, but I never quite got that complaint. You can tell something isn't right pretty early, and the show would have benefited from creating more suspense and intrigue for a longer period of time. That said, I admit the later episodes do a much better job at weaving the plot lines together in a more engaging way. While I personally like how far the team went with the sitcoms through the era gimmick, I can see it being dull if you don't find those episodes as charming as others might. Especially since at times, the show focuses on sitcom tropes of the era instead of actually using those tropes in a meaningful way. For example, in episode 1, we really don't need to spend that much time on Vision's job. It's cute, but you get the joke pretty early. On the other hand, the character moments in that same episode are a cool twist on how classic sitcoms typically end.
Huh. Or a song. Or even wedding rings.
Well, we could never do that. Today could be our anniversary.
Of what? Surviving our first dinner party?
Precisely.
After episode 4, the show does a much better job at balancing the plot and characters. The tension escalates as Vision starts to see the bigger picture, the peanut gallery gets more involved, and Wanda is doing everything in her power to keep everything under control. While the middle chunk is really good, episode 8 is definitely the best episode of the entire show. Which is interesting because on paper, it's not all that different from the show's worst episode, episode 4. This episode is focused on the side characters and mostly fills in the gaps up to this point in the story. But it really drags on. You could cut episode 4 in half and not really lose that much. You don't need to treat the audience like children and explain every little thing. Leaving some mystery is totally fine. The show over-explains a lot in later episodes.
For seismic blasts. The energy inside has rewritten your cells.
In a given space, only the witch that casts the runes can use her magic.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
Until the very end.
Only the witch who cast them can use her magic.
But it's at its worst here. Episode 8 plays a very similar role by being Wanda's missing link between the MCU movies. But the difference between Episode 4 and Episode 8 are night and day. Episode 8 is so good because it's so character driven. It's really similar to famous episodes in other shows, like Janet's in The Good Place. Or How Your Mother Met Me in How I Met Your Mother. Episodes like this are fantastic at adding context to things we have some knowledge of and giving us a much better perspective of how characters feel about what's going on. Giving a character an entire episode to themselves is a wonderful way to recontextualize what we know about a story and make us a fan if we weren't one already. Episode 8, previously on, is no different. We get a much deeper perspective of Wanda's upbringing and all the little things that matter, like how her and Vision got to know each other, and the aftermath of Vision's death. And it culminates in this wonderful scene of her breaking down in her grief and creating the new reality. I know I'm not the first person to mention how good this episode is, and it's what a lot of people have been wanting from Wanda's character for a long time. But while episode 8 is great, one episode does not make a show a masterpiece. Just look at How I Met Your Mother. And then we get to the finale of WandaVision, and the finale is the best complete picture of the show as a whole. It has a lot of fantastic character moments, like Vision talking to himself,
You're being very rude.
and Wanda breaking down as Westview turns on her. But then the next minute, we're back to the stupid stuff, like Hayward being the token bad Marvel villain and anime fighting. Thankfully, the silly stuff doesn't last very long. Right after the dumb superhero stuff, it pivots right back to the good stuff. The show ends on a bittersweet note for the Maximoff family, but not without the potential for a happy ending somewhere down the road. I'm sure the finale is disappointing for a lot of people, but as I mentioned, it's a good example of WandaVision when it's great, and when it's not. The difference is we're getting it all in 1 hour, instead of being spread out week by week. So, as for the show as a whole, the pacing of WandaVision can be hit or miss for some people, and the episode quality itself can vary week from week. But even the worst episodes aren't that bad. There are way worse episodes of TV out there. And while the weird and surreal stuff is cool, there should have been more of it. Episodes 1 and 2 have those really cool transitions from a sitcom camera style to a horror-esque camera style. And episode 6 has that awesome part where Vision sees all the townspeople Wanda is brainwashing. If anything, I'd say the show is too ambitious for its own good. There's a lot to manage between the Wanda and Vision shenanigans, the outside plot, and the new characters. And while it was a great idea to make WandaVision a show instead of a movie, when you look at the series as a whole, you can kind of see that even a single miniseries might not have been enough for the full scope of a story like this. Now, I'm not saying a full season of TV would have been better, but when you look at the differences in episode quality, or some of the more creative ideas in some episodes, it's hard not to see how some of the potential might have gotten lost somewhere down the line. Even giving the show an additional 2 or 3 episodes would go a long way towards building a more engaging mystery that's more fulfilling by its conclusion instead of using gimmicks to keep people watching, balancing the tropes and plots with character moments more effectively, and improving the characters that aren't Wanda, Vision, and Agatha. This part is especially important, as if characters like the kids were fleshed out, it would make the good parts of the show even better. Instead of being sad for Wanda by the end, the audience could have been sad with Wanda. The opposite of this applies as well. If you cut most of the side characters or plot elements and focus just on the Maximoffs and Agatha for 9 episodes, most people would probably still like the show. A lot of the reviews I showed earlier called WandaVision bold and creative, but if you want to talk about bold, having a 9-episode miniseries where Grief is the main antagonist instead of some guy, again, would be such an awesome and creative idea for the MCU. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that it would have been cool for WandaVision to take more advantage of some of those creative ideas, like dialing up some of the horror elements, or having more character moments that we never got to see in the movies. The parts like Wanda and Pietro reminiscing about their childhood, or Wanda and Vision adjusting to parenthood, are really, really good. But other stuff gets in the way of that, like the over-explanations or the lamer side characters. That said, none of these issues make the show any worse. WandaVision is mostly good because it puts the spotlight on great characters. When it's focused on Wanda and Vision, you can see why people were excited week after week. At the same time, it's in this strange middle ground where it sometimes shows off fresh ideas, and sometimes takes advantage of the character-driven nature of sitcoms, and other times making the same mistakes its predecessors have, not to mention making some new ones. While a lot of it is good, even great, other parts definitely aren't the reason we tuned in every week. I can see a lot of people skipping over some parts of the show on a rewatch. If there's one saving grace, it's that Marvel still has some creativity. It's come a long way from
flavorless, unremarkable Marvel movies.
Oh, they are so not a big deal.
I know!
It's just all there is.
Yeah.
And while a lot of people might still agree with Jeff and Annie, there's a lot who are still interested in what Marvel has up its sleeve next. Hey, thanks for taking the time to sit through this. If you enjoyed this review, I encourage you to subscribe and stick around. The next TV review I'm working on is a full review of NBC's The Good Place. It's gonna take some time though, since it's like 4 times as long as WandaVision. But until then, I have a few other finished projects that should be on your screen. If you like superheroes or blockbusters, check them out. I hope you enjoy watching them as I did making them. Till then, I hope to see you next time.